Welcome back to the Coach Cardoso Show. Today, I have my high school friend, and I know he's done a lot since then. Author, uh, he's definitely, if you guys heard of the Kerry Corner radio show, he's been the host for over 10 years at Kerry Corner's radio show. And it's amazing to have him in here. And he has a lot to talk about. He's lived a pretty good life. So I'm going to introduce him and let him teach us. Go ahead, Kerry. Nice to have you on the show.
So thank you so much, brother, for having me, man. It's an honor to be a guest on the Coach Cardoso show, man. Again, I haven't seen you since the 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 late '80s, bro. And you look the same. So God bless you on that note. But it's definitely an honor to be on your show. Congratulations on your new endeavor.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
thanks for taking the time and traveling here to sit down with me and so we can do this interview.
Absolutely, man.
Beautiful. I'm going to jump right into it because
Okay.
I read your bio
Uh-oh.
and your bio is long, awesome, has a lot of, good stuff in there.
Yeah.
What was one of those first things in life that happened to you that kind of like made you reevaluate life or something that's, pretty much, let's say,
Hmm.
let's call it bad? It was a
Okay.
life lesson.
Right. Yeah, right.
What was it? What was one of the first things that happened to you,
Ooh,
like a life lesson?
wow, there was a lot of those.
We start with the first one.
Well, with the main one, I guess the most obvious one would
Yeah.
be going to prison. So in 2004, I was arrested um, at Pennsylvania Station in New York. That's where the Amtrak trains come in. Um, and without going to too many details in regards to the arrest itself, I was apprehended with a then friend of mine who was actually a co-defendant, but turned state's evidence. So, from Boston too, he was. We'd gone way back actually. We'd known each other years before I moved to New York City. But long story short, I was sentenced to 2.5 to 7.5 years in state prison, and the last 10 months of that prison sentence was spent at Attica. And Attica, I don't know if you know, is like one of the worst prisons, not just in New York State. It is the worst prison in New York State in terms of, when we say worst, we're talking about things that happen during confinement, violence and stuff like that. A lot of oppression from the corrections officers. It was really, really a horrible place. It's the supermax for the state of New York, but it's also like one of the top 5 prisons in the nation. So, I mean, and I'm there for like a relatively petty charge of uh, identity theft and stuff. These are white collar crimes,
Mhm.
and I'm there with like murderers and things like that. So, coming away from that experience was while I was on parole after being released from Attica, I actually chose to enroll in college and take criminal justice studies. And when you're a ex felon, obviously, there's not a lot of opportunities in the criminal justice field for an ex felon. I certainly couldn't be a judge, lawyer, cop, whatever, and wouldn't have wanted to be. But I wanted to take that particular course because I wanted to be able to learn about my experience from a judicial standpoint. Um, of course, I committed the crimes that I was convicted for, but I wanted to know about the law. Obviously, for anybody that's ever been incarcerated or had any brushes with the law, you know that everything that's legal isn't always lawful. You know what I'm saying? The courts do things that they're not supposed to do. The judges, the prosecutors, this is a game. They're not always playing by the rules that they've set forth, right? And so I wanted more of an education on the legal system, on the criminal justice system. I want to know laws, so just being a black man in America, I would know what my rights were, what they weren't. But also, of course, post release is certainly a time of reflection, of life reflection. Like, Keri D. Singleton, how did you get here? You didn't come from that type of uh, household. My mother never went to jail. I didn't come from that prison pipeline that a lot of
Mhm.
people, uh, you know, that find themselves in prison come from. Um, and like you and I went to a college preparatory school,
Mhm.
so I didn't come from a hood school. I came from a inner city area like yourself, Roxbury, but I wasn't one of those kids that sold drugs. Or I wasn't in the streets like that. So it really wasn't in my character, one would think, to go to prison. So I had to think about that. Like, dude, how did you get here? Like, really, how did you get here? And I'll tell you something else. I remember when I first got to Attica, and mind you, I'd been in prison at this point for a couple of months. They shift you around to different facilities, but I was in low classification facilities that looked more like college campuses before they sent me to Attica. Now I remember being in the cafeteria at Attica, which they call the mess hall, right? Looking around and seeing what I'd only seen on television. Like there's actually sharpshooter corrections officers in the four corners of the mess hall with rifles pointed at you in the event that there's any kind of riot. Because of course the Attica riots was a big thing in the 60s and they want to make sure that that never happens again. So I'm like, wow, these people are actually here to kill me if something goes down, right? So I never Ilidio, I was in the mess hall. I looked up, I looked around, I looked at the people next to me, the people in front of me, and I remember saying to myself, "Nice job. You've managed in a lifetime to have breakfast with Tony Braxton, and you've also managed to have breakfast with these guys. Like your life has really changed." And so again, my post-release experience, aside from college, there was a lot of self-reflection. I had to figure out who I was and where I was going, and um, what was I going to do to make up for spending 3 years in prison, and that in and of itself was a journey.
Obviously, this is a growth show. So thanks for sharing that
Thank you.
because
Yeah,
I think a lot of people need to hear that. And the fact, reflecting, from what you said, you talked about accountability. So you was accountable for
absolutely.
the action.
Yeah,
It might have been a harsh punishment
yeah.
in my eyes, but you're accountable for what you did,
Right.
which is good. And then you try to reflect and um, find yourself and what's the next step and so forth.
Eh, so I committed the crimes. It wasn't like I had to sit there and rationalize the whole, feeling or evaluate the whole feeling of a person that's wrongfully convicted, right? I might have been overly convicted, and I do feel that I like really should have got probation
Mhm.
as opposed to state prison time. You know what I mean? It wasn't a violent crime. Um, it wasn't robbery or anything like that. It was identity theft
Mhm.
via credit cards and stuff like that, right? But I felt most accountable to my family, specifically my mom.
Yeah.
She really struggled with that
Yeah.
experience. Uh, you know, there weren't a lot of visits. Obviously, I was in Western New York State by Buffalo, and she's in Eastern Massachusetts. Like, this is a super distance between Boston and where Attica, which is located in Wyoming County, New York. She visited once, I believe. Didn't write a lot because she was like really depressed about what I was going through. I later found out that when she would attempt to write me, she would never mail the letters because mailing them in her mind kind of made the situation more real.
Mm.
Meanwhile, I'm in prison, not hearing from my mother, and I'm getting angry at my family, like, you're abandoning me and, blah, blah,
Mm.
blah. So when I came out, man, I was on a mission to do whatever I could do to make my family proud, like to somehow make up for that experience. And so I kind of overdid it with all of the things that I would later do in terms of, getting awards and accolades from the music industry. A lot of that was the result of me feeling like I needed to uh, make up for the prison experience, if for no one else, for my mom. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So accountability, yeah, that was. I dare say I may still be doing that many years after being released from the criminal justice system. I've gone to college and been a 4.0 student and gotten a plethora of awards from different politicians in New York State and even here in Boston. I mean, but it's kind of I always feel like I still owe her. She doesn't feel that way,
Mhm.
but I still feel like, damn, I owe it to her to be the best that I can be because of that low point in my life, in the first part of this millennium. So,
I can
yeah,
understand. I mean, your life pretty much that changed overnight. I mean, that's
absolutely.
just a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Probably prior to that, I know that you had lost your father real young.
Yeah. In 1996, my father, Actually, the day before Father's Day, my father was murdered, um, maybe a half a mile from where I grew up in Roxbury, in Boston. Now, my parents had been separated since I was like 6 years old, and when he died, I was 24, right? But luckily, my parents remained best friends. In fact, when my father was murdered, it was my mother that buried him. So they still had that good relationship. They were still friends. It's not like I had two parents that were at each other's throats, right? So my father's and so thank you for bringing that up. That's another point in my life when I had to really, really think about life in general and make some adult decisions. So at 24, I was still living at home. Um, and although I wanted to move to New York, um, and more specifically want to move away from Boston many years before 1996. It was it was 1996, and in part my father's murder that actually pushed me out the door because he was killed in June. I moved in September, and it wasn't exclusively because of what happened to my dad. I can't stress that enough. There were other incidents that happened even after my father's death that was traumatizing for me that had nothing to do with his death. Collectively, I was like, "You know what? This is it. I gotta go. I gotta leave." There were never any arrests, right? So there was the fear factor
Mhm.
of living in a neighborhood where your father was killed. I don't know the face of the person who did this, and they're still on the loose. To this day, they haven't been arrested, although they're probably not alive.
Yeah.
That was 27 years ago. But yeah, that was a moment of a life changing moment, obviously, and I really had to make some decisions. Kerry, what are you going to do with yourself? Like this is you don't want to be in Boston anyway. You want to move. Things here are getting a little, uncomfortable to say the least. You're starting to fear when you're on public transportation and you're walking the streets. If the person that killed your father, you don't know, he might know who I am. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of uncomfortability. And sometimes being uncomfortable is great because sometimes being uncomfortable is what you need to initiate change. So as uncomfortable as 1996 was, it was that particular year and all of the traumatic experiences that happened during that year that eventually pushed me to New York, and I've been there for 27 years. So
So I guess sometimes we need stuff to push us out of our comfort zone. Not that that was a good experience for you. It's just that
exactly,
probably with that extra push you needed,
yeah.
that helped you go ahead and do it.
It's gonna say, like you just said, man. I mean, not that I'm okay with my father being
Mhm.
murdered or the plethora of things that happened after that. I believe in this world, nothing's an accident. The fact that
Mhm.
you and I are sitting
Mhm.
across from each other, and I haven't seen you since the late '80s,
Yeah.
it's not an accident. Like I think everything that happens to us, good or bad, is part of our journey.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to uh, get from those experiences the things that we need to grow to move forward. Or maybe it's just to share with somebody else. Maybe your quote unquote, because you said bad experience, not really bad
Mhm.
experiences. They're just uncomfortable
Right.
experiences, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you had to go through something to for somebody else to to bear witness to what you went through. Because I went to prison, and so now one of the things that I do as often as I can with my schedule is I go into youth prisons in New York City and I talk to the kids about what I've been through, but I explain to them that going to prison doesn't have to be their ceiling, right? A lot of those kids have said to me that they wouldn't listen to a word that I had said if I myself had not have been
Yeah.
incarcerated. I'll talk to them about the books, the radio show, the TV show. But they don't really want to hear that because they don't feel like they can relate to your experience. But when I say, and by the way, I was incarcerated in Attica, you see their eyes wide open. And now you're not just this adult sitting in front of them preaching. You're this person that's been through what they're going through. And so you they can relate to you. And now they want to listen because they want to hear the story of somebody that went through what they're going through, but got out of it. So sometimes I feel as if me going to prison, for example, um, was a was necessary for me to be able to empathize with other people too.
Mhm.
That's important. Having empathy often means you have to go through something. Otherwise, you can't really sympathizing and empathizing are two different
Yeah.
words. You can sympathize with something that you're not that you haven't experienced. But empathizing involves understanding what a person is dealing with based on the fact that you have that commonality. You know what I mean? So,
I totally agree with you. There's no bad experience.
right.
And I realized in my life, the things I used to pout and cry about, there's so much a blessing. And
Yes.
you're right. Everything's in divine timing. Somehow I mustered up the guts.
Right.
Now is the time for me to do the podcast.
Exactly.
And look and behold, I haven't seen you in years. I'm not even going to say the numbers because
Yeah.
it's before 1990.
Right.
And
Decades.
now we're sitting here and we're doing the podcast and with a whole new journey.
Right.
And I'm learning things about you. And the people that are listening and watching are
Right.
learning a lot right now.
Right.
So what you're saying is definitely beneficial um, for you to be saying that. And you know what you're talking about when you say that.
Right.
So I remember us having a conversation about the podcast a week ago.
Yes, sir.
And I said, well, the podcast is not for people to come cry
Right.
and then whine.
I laughed.
Yeah, I laughed. Yeah,
Can't
that's
cry
true.
and pout on the show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So they could do that on their own.
Right.
So we all know that there's injustice in the world. It's not fair, but it's about becoming a better version of yourself and giving back to the world.
Absolutely.
That's our job here.
Right.
You know. But let me get on to some good things too.
Yeah.
I mean, you're on a radio show
Yes.
for over 10 years.
10 and a half years. We're
10.
about to wrap up in December
Yeah.
of 2023. Yeah.
And you were telling me the story how you got into it. You said it was never really.
Yeah. From the time that you and I were in school together, well, certainly by my senior year, you were a year ahead of me. By the time I was a senior, I think my feet were cemented in me wanting to be in the music business. Around the time that you and I would have gone to school together, I think at that point, journalism was the direction that I wanted to. I wanted to write for the New York Times or the New York Post, for New York something. You know, I wanted to write for in a periodical. But like I said, by the time I was a senior in high school, and certainly by the time um, the summer of '91 came around, I was definitely headed for the music business. I was managing artists in Boston. And I knew that I wanted to work at a record label. Back then, record labels actually meant something. Today, I don't even know if they exist. Um, but so in 2013, I was actually uh, uh, co-host of somebody else's radio show on an internet radio station in New York. And I only actually agreed to be a co-host because I was going through something personal at the time, like you know, fiance cheated on me, and I was like, what am I gonna do to, get past this feeling? This was very new to me, right? And so I agreed to be a co-host on the show basically because I wanted to get my mind in a different space. And after a couple of interview guest spots on this guy's show, I got my own radio show. But I only really agreed to do my own radio show, Ilidio, because uh, the show that I was a co-host on was about to get canceled, right, by the radio station. And I still wanted to have a platform to promote my book that was coming out. I mean, that's the only reason. And my station manager at the time said, "Yeah, you could have your own show." I was like, "Yeah, I don't want to do my allergies and my nasals. It's that my voice is not right for. I don't want." Being a co-host is one thing, but having my own show and having to talk for 2 hours about stuff, I don't really didn't want to do that. But he said, "Well, you should, and you're ripe for it. And by the way, you need that platform, don't you?" And I was like, so I said, "You know what? I'm going to keep the radio show for about a year, and that'll give me more than enough time to promote this book, my first novel that was coming out, and then I can get rid of the radio show." And that was in April of 2013. So, you know, that was several books ago and several years ago. And so I'm here doing it. But like I said, I believe that everything happens for a reason. Me hosting that show, I ended up having countless guests come on the show. We had celebrities come on the show, but we also had people who were aspiring to be uh, chefs and clothing designers and artists and all kinds of things. People coming on the show. We had one guest that I had met at Attica, and after being in jail for like 30 years, he was released, and I had him come on the show to talk about his experience. So I used the show's platform um, as an opportunity for other people to promote whatever they were doing, whatever businesses they had going on. I wanted to be a viable uh, option for people to promote their businesses, to promote themselves, whether it be music, whether it be art, whatever, other authors. And again, whereas I say that I believe everything happens for a reason, I did not want to do that show. I absolutely did not want to do it. But how many lives did I, or lives and businesses did I give a platform for over a 10 and a half year period? You know what I mean? More importantly, the relationships that I was able to make and maintain as the result of having that show is priceless. Priceless. There was I cannot sit here and tell you how many wonderful relationships, business and friendships came out of that radio show. So again, everything is as it is supposed to be.
Yes. Yeah. Pick one of the guests that you think was one of the most impactful in your life at the
Ouch.
time. Just pick one that
Ten
I
and a
know
half
you
years?
mentioned the guy that was in Attica.
Mhm.
But if that's him, that's him. Just pick one.
No.
I know it's 10 years, but it's a
Ten
lot
and
to
a
pick.
half years
Yeah, 10 and a half.
of guests that was most impactful for me?
Yeah, you can be like, wow, the
Um,
aha moment. This has been a person who's helped me grow. Uh, this person,
you're not asking a lot of people have asked me who is the best guest or who's uh, the
yeah,
favorite guest.
yeah,
Your question is a little bit more specific, and I think I can actually answer that. So, Mike Africa Jr. from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was the guest that I had on the show that was most impactful. So, a little bit of background. In 1985, the Philadelphia Police Department, under the direction of the city's first black mayor, Mayor Wilson Good, the Philadelphia Police Department dropped a bomb on a row house in a very tight knit. In Philadelphia, the houses are all row houses,
mhm,
and the streets are super narrow. In an attempt to evict a Back to Nature group from their row house, the mayor okayed the dropping of a bomb on an occupied row house.
wow,
There were 13 people inside that house, including children. 11 of them died. That house was destroyed along with 63 other houses on 3 different blocks. One of the worst examples of police brutality in the nation's history. Unfortunately, one of the least talked about. Mike Africa Jr. was the organization that they were bombing was the Move organization. And then the Move organization, all members take on the last name Africa. Mike Africa Jr. is the son of two of parents that were Move members, right? They were in prison on a prior charge when that incident happened. Mike himself was living with his grandmother about a half a mile away from the bomb site in another part of West Philadelphia. But his family, for lack of a better term, because people in that organization all consider themselves family, whether they're blood related or not. Those were his relatives. That was his family, and in some cases, those were his blood relatives.
hmm
Right? He was very young when it happened. He was born in '78. The bombing was in '85. My math is terrible, but you can do the math
hmm
and figure out how old he would have been. He's been an advocate for getting his parents out of prison, getting other Move members out of prison, and I've followed the history of the Move organization for many, many years. Did reports for college, got A's on a variety of essays. So to finally get to meet one of the Move members um, recently, I think it was earlier this year. Yeah, it was early 2023. He came on the show. He was a guest. And to hear him speak about all the things that I just talked about that I've always read about was deep. And I know I'm going on and on, but he really brought a lot of realness to that particular story for me. And I felt like, damn, like of all the things that he's gone through, if he can be this articulate spokesperson, nobody has an excuse
uh,
to not be their best selves.
yeah. And you said the move. Can you educate us a little about that? What really is that? Cliff notes, fine.
Cliff notes. So the Move organization started about 1972, right? They were a back to nature group. They believed that the system was awful and rotten and blah, blah,
Mm,
blah. They didn't believe in the poisoning of water, the poisoning of air, the poisoning of soil. They didn't believe in animals being put in zoos and aquariums. They believed in life. They were the religion of life, right? That's what they embraced, the freedom of all life. Um, as such, that meant life in all of its forms, from dogs and cats to trees and plants to humans and rats and roaches and all kinds of other
Mhm.
life. Period. Right? Water, air. Well, they came of age in the early '70s in Philadelphia, where I mean, I'm not sure I would want people living next door to me that embraced the thriving lives of rats,
Mm.
But they were the type of people that had a problem with extermination and things of that
Mhm.
nature, right? They also had a problem with the mayor at the time, who was Frank Rizzo, a raging racist who was first the commissioner of police for the Philadelphia Police Department. He later became the mayor of the city. So they clashed all the time about political issues and cultural issues. The Philadelphia Police Department at that point was known to be one of the most violent police departments and oppressive police departments in the nation, specifically to people of color. So the MOVE organization was constantly clashing with the Rizzo administration, and that ended up in 1978 turning into a shootout
Mm.
between the MOVE organization and the Philadelphia Police Department. And there was a cop that was killed. I think you can understand that when a cop is
Mhm.
killed,
Mhm.
that turns things up,
Okay. Yeah.
for a police
Mhm.
department,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
And all of the occupants of the Move House at that point were jailed for 30 years to life, including Mike Africa's
Oh, okay.
parents, right? So Mike Africa was actually born in prison. And then other Move members in '85 went to combat with the police for pretty much the same reasons. There were the beef that they had with the system would obviously impact their relationship with the police department and the government in the city of Philadelphia and the residents. And that second confrontation in 1985 is what precipitated the bombing and the fire and the deaths, and no arrests were ever made. Nobody was ever held accountable in city government for the deaths of 11 people,
Yeah.
including children. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's a big story in and of itself. And unfortunately, like I said, in our collective as Americans, in terms of history, when we talk about atrocities uh, to people of color by the government, we always talk about the Waco incident, right?
Mhm.
We always talk about Black Wall Street.
Mhm.
We always talk about George Floyd, but we don't hear about the incident that I think probably was the worst uh, event in U.S. history in terms of police brutality. Again, 11
Yeah.
people murdered and 62 houses lost.
Yeah.
I don't know of any other incident in police in American history where the police or the government in general, other than the eradication of the Native
Yeah.
Americans, I'm not sure that there's another story that's that big, but unfortunately, we don't hear about it.
Maybe I forgot, but I've never heard of
Yeah,
this until right now.
yeah.
So,
So there's a good chance you never knew.
yeah,
There's a good chance you never knew.
I'm gonna chalk it like I maybe I just forgotten. I don't
Yeah.
know, but
Well, if
yeah,
you never heard of it,
yeah, I never.
then you would absolutely not be in the minority.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I figured.
Um, I remember I did a college paper on the event, and none of my classmates, very few of my professors knew about it. But through me doing the assignment, a lot of people were able to, be like, wow, this happened, and we read up on it. Maybe people will, as a result of watching your podcast, be interested in what happened
Mhm.
in 1985 with the MOVE organization and be inclined to do their research. Like I said, things always happen for a reason.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Have you? Is that what transitioned you over to be a writer, or did you start? Did you write and publish your books? Because I know you published 2 books.
mhm.
Like, yeah, so I'm sure you wrote more.
Yeah.
So is that what kind of was the bridge? That like, okay, let me get into writing, or were you always a writer?
Uh,
The book.
my first time being my the my bridge to being a writer, I was 9 years old,
Okay.
and, I wrote a poem, a Halloween poem. I entered a contest and wrote a Halloween poem that ended up in the Boston Herald. They picked different kids from Boston, um, who submitted Halloween-themed poems. Mine was one of them, and at 9 years old, I remember seeing Kerry Singleton, the name of my poem. The poem was in the paper, and it was at that point that I decided I wanted to be a writer. So yeah, I was. That's what I was always supposed to be. Well, no, I was supposed to be what I ended up being, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, but um, my earliest aspirations, I think, were of being a writer, um, and uh, that came at age 9,
So, what year did you publish your first book?
2013. Yeah, when I started the radio show.
Okay, is that so that's the one where a guy is a male prostitute? Is that the one
Correct,
we're
The
talking?
Wanderers Game.
The Wanderers
Yeah,
game?
and I
Yeah.
wrote I wrote that book, Ilidio, and the sophomore my sophomore novel, Idol, was both written while I was incarcerated. I
Oh.
wrote those in solitary confinement at Attica on a series of pieces of paper with a very short pencil because they don't let you
Hmm.
use, long pencils or pens in prison. I wrote my manuscripts on scraps of paper on the backs of books and stuff like that. And then I still have them at home as a memory of where my books were born. I still literally in a folder at my house. I have all of the original manuscripts written on the back of you know nurses uh, requests, prison nurse requests, and all that. Um, so yeah, no, it was 2013 was when my first book came out, and it actually in 2016 it was made into a Broadway play,
Hmm.
which was really dope for one night. That was really cool. But yeah, no, I always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be a writer. In fact, when you and I were in high school together, I don't know if you remember Miss Gonfa.
Probably not.
She was an English teacher that I had in the 10th grade. You would have been in the 11th grade at the time. And to this day, she's like one of my favorite people. I've given her copies of all my books. She came to my very first book signing
Nice.
in Boston. She inspired the hell out of me. If it wasn't for my mother's a writer too, but if it wasn't for my 10th grade English teacher at Boston Technical High School, I may not be a writer today. So there've been many people, many instances that have inspired me.
So she was like a good mentor, a
Oh,
good, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, she was awesome, awesome. Every time we came into the class, she would have on the board some topic, some random topic, and then she would ask us to write in our journals what did we think about whatever was written on the board. And so that made it so that every single day that I had my English class, I had to think. It made us think about different topics. And then we'd have to stand up in the class and, read our thoughts and stuff like that, which I thought was really cool. Um,
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I just did a reel was it yesterday on
mhm.
the importance of mentorship from
Ah,
from one of my favorite books, 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth by John C. Maxwell.
nice.
So, and that was part of how important mentors are. They can inspire you, and also
Mhm.
if you have a bad one,
Right.
with character flaws, that can kind of spiral you downhill too. So that's pretty interesting. So you
Absolutely.
wrote that one book,
Yes.
and what did you think of how it sold? What did you think of the book?
I'll say this, and the reason I'm making these weird faces is because the Wanderers Game, my debut novel, as I said, I wrote it while I was in Attica.
Hmm.
It's about a guy who comes from this really rough city in New Jersey called Asbury Park.
Hmm.
He comes from a real rough household. There's domestic violence in the house. His dream is to be an actor, and his dream is to be like the biggest actor he can be, in Hollywood and stuff like that. Right? He moves to New York City to seek out, vehicles for this dream to come true. He finds himself coupled with a manager. The manager thinks it's a good idea for his first acting gig to be in a porno flick. This guy does not want to be in anybody's porn. Like that's
Hmm.
not the direction he's trying to go. But his manager figures this is a good way for him to get into the business. He decides he's not going to do it, but and a male all male porn at that. He decides that he's not going to do that. But when he goes to the audition, um, and that's where he finds out that it's an all male
Hmm.
pornography flick that he's going to be in. He says no, but he meets a guy during the audition. They become best friends, right? And then later on, they end up becoming male prostitutes. But neither one of them necessarily like what they're doing. They both have girlfriends, so they don't even they're not into that whole lifestyle thing. They're just doing it to get money to get by, and it tells the story of, you know, their journeys as male escorts.
Yeah.
And the reason I made the face is because the book did well. You know, the book did well. The sales were cool. You know, I established a fan base. But the thing that was so uncomfortable for me was that um, many people told me over and over again they thought the book was about me. Like, no, not at all.
Mm.
But the reason that a lot of people thought that the book was about me is because they said that the writing was so good, and I was able to make people really believe that these characters were real
Mm.
and that these circumstances were real. And that's just because, you know, I mean, I knew people that did do that,
Mm.
and you know,
Yeah.
but I mean, for the record, no, it
Yeah.
wasn't my story.
Yeah.
That's why I made the face, but it did do well, and I think that it illuminated a light on a situation that a lot of people in this country experience.
Yeah.
That again it's not a well told. So we're all familiar with prostitution
Yeah.
and you know and women and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
That's I mean in Nevada it's legal, but the story of two male escorts is different, and the trials and tribulations that they went through. Of course, I'm not
Yeah.
going to give away the ending,
Yeah.
but one of the things that I was really happy about is that it gave people an opportunity to see a side of society that don't think most people do see. And I was told that a lot. Like,
Yeah.
wow, I never even knew that this happened, and you know. But I can't tell you how many radio interviews and how many television interviews, and when doing book signings and meeting the fans face to face. Are you sure this is not about you? I'm like, oh my god, I should put a clause in there that you know. So that's why I made the face. Like, oh.
Well, and then you got somebody like me that goes right to the prostitution, right? All the great things you already said, I left all those out and I went right to the male prostitute. I didn't even call it escort.
Yeah.
I call it, so
Well, I mean, because he was
so
prostituting.
yeah,
Being,
yeah.
I mean,
But there's more to it
yeah,
because you
yeah.
just,
I mean,
yeah,
is there
yeah,
a difference between being an escort, whether you're male or female, and being a prostitute?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Because ostensibly an escort could be somebody that doesn't have sex with his or her clients at all. He or she just literally accompanies
mm,
people to events, and
mm,
that's a thing.
yeah,
People
yeah,
actually will pay a handsome guy or a beautiful woman to, you know, accompany them to an event or a ball or something to that effect.
yeah,
But Reggie Watson, the lead character in my book, was doing a lot more than just
yeah,
escorting people.
yeah,
He was
yeah. So you went from that book and
Mhm.
now and then you wrote another book.
Yeah, Idol was my second book that
Hmm.
came out in 2016. That's about a kid from Philadelphia who has this infatuation with this fictitious recording artist. Again, people were like, "Ah, is this about you? Because you know you love Janet Jackson." I'm
Yeah.
like, "No, it's not." But this guy, I mean, he's totally infatuated with this fictitious recording artist who's supposed to be like the biggest singer of all time, right? Well, he gets the opportunity to meet her when she comes to Philadelphia to do an autograph signing session when her album comes out. He gets to meet her, and they ended up in a relationship or a situationship because she's in a relationship with her manager, the superstar,
Hmm.
whose name is oh my god, I forgot her name, Renee Starr. She has a relationship with her boyfriend, but it's very tumultuous and very violent. You know, she only keeps the guy around, to be honest, because he's a great businessman. He's a horrible boyfriend. But then she meets this young guy who's like, you know, he's a good lover. You know, physically, he's everything that she wants. She's trying to juggle the two of them at the same time. And she's in a love triangle. And again, I don't want to talk about what happens at the end,
Hmm.
but that's the synopsis of that book. And it did pretty well for me too. And then years later in 2020, I released a poetry book called Journey. And Journey is a collection of 30 poems that I wrote also while in prison.
Mm.
Um, but it's not a book in the terms of it's not a novel. It doesn't have a story. It's just a collection of 30 poems that I wrote that are very, very personal. And my mother was like, you should put them in a book one day. So I decided to go ahead and do that.
So you went ahead and published
Yeah.
that. Okay, so you pretty much the three things that you have
Yes.
out
Yep.
there.
And it also came out with a spoken word album.
You sound like you've done a lot in life.
Yeah, I've tried
I
because
mean,
I've been wanting to. First of all, I'm an ambitious person
hmm
by nature.
yeah,
But again, bro, after I went to prison
hmm
and when I was released from prison,
hmm
I just went full speed ahead with accomplishment after accomplishment after accomplishment. Humanitarian award, You know what
Mhm.
I mean? And these things in and of themselves are just tangible objects,
Mhm.
but they say to me, I guess they represent to me that I've grown past the prison experience because it was traumatizing.
Yeah, and a lot of times when situations like that can make us bitter
Hmm.
as opposed to being better,
Yeah, you're right.
and the way that you kind of like sat back and evaluate that, I have a lot of respect for that.
Thank you.
You know,
Thank you,
um,
brother.
that's good.
There was some bitterness,
Yeah,
but I
sure.
turned the bitterness. You
I'm
know what it
sure.
was, Ilidio, that really made me bitter? When I sat there and I had to do this evaluation, right? So I go to prison for 2.5 to 3.5
Hmm.
years for identity theft.
Hmm.
That's a crime,
Yeah,
but it's a crime that doesn't really
yeah,
hurt
yeah,
anybody.
yeah,
Whereas somebody murdered my dad
yeah,
and got away with
yeah,
it, at least legally,
yeah,
because there's never been any arrest.
yeah,
So when I balance that out,
yeah,
I went to prison for a white collar crime,
yeah,
but nobody ever paid for my father's death.
yeah,
That was hard
yeah,
for me to swallow,
yeah,
and that's what made me
yeah,
that's where the bitterness really came in.
yeah,
Not so much me going to prison because I was guilty
yeah, yeah.
ultimately, you know what I
I get
mean?
it.
But the fact that I did more time in prison than this person that killed my father, that kinda rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
But like I said, I went to college immediately I went to college while I was on parole. Um, was in the honor society, everything was aced, no B's, all A's. Um, but then the next step was about being better. The
Yeah.
next part of the journey was I got to be better. I got to be better, not just for me, but for my mom. My mother
Mhm,
always says, just
mhm.
do it for you, just do
Yeah,
it for you. And I
yeah,
hear her,
yeah,
but yeah, just that's not the truth of the matter is nothing makes me feel more accomplished
yeah.
than being able to have my mother come to New York,
Mhm,
these red carpet events
mhm,
where I'm getting an award or
mhm,
I'm getting something.
mhm.
Um, and I see the look on her face when politicians in New York are saying, Kerry's a great guy. And he did this for the community. We want to give him this award. I look right in her face.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
the feeling that seems to help me heal
mm,
with the,
yeah,
the prison trauma.
yeah. And I think that, like, I do a lot of times is I put something outside of me. This is benefiting that person.
Right.
How happy will that person be? And how, and so once I do that, then it's my why.
Right.
Why are you doing this? And it doesn't have to do with money, it doesn't have to do with
Right.
praise. It has to do with, for example, helping a lot of people,
Right. Exactly.
and don't get me wrong. I want money from this
Right.
podcast. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Don't
He
get me
wa- he
wrong.
wa- yeah.
I'll look right in the camera. I want money too. We
Right.
want to monetize this, but I'm doing this more because the growth
Right.
for us to become a better version of ourselves. That's it. We don't sign up to be 80% of ourselves. That's not why we're here.
Right.
We're here to be 100% of who we are. And I didn't really start looking into that, I don't know, 12 years ago when I was
Right.
introduced to that. And I
Yeah.
probably still didn't look at that until maybe 7 years ago.
Right.
So that's kind of why I get really into this.
And I'll say this, brother, like, you and I um have been in communication for many years on Facebook and
Hmm.
on Instagram, right? On social media, we've stayed connected. Um, but when I saw that uh you were putting this together, I saw what it was about. I was like, yo, I'm so proud of this dude. Like, I want to do whatever I can to absolutely positively make sure that he wins. And, told you about the magazine write-ups and
Hmm.
all of the other things that I want to be able to do to promote the platform. Um, but then when we had a conversation and you really laid out the outline and the synopsis for what this was going to be about, I just like glowed because, especially today, we're so when I say we, I mean the human
Hmm.
beings, we're so um into ourselves. Everything is about look at me. You know what I mean? People put on most podcasts are the result of somebody wanting attention. Let's just
Hmm.
be honest.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some because the people want money, but a lot more they want to be seen. They want to be
Yeah.
praised. They want to be the next internet superstar or whatever their end goal is. But the fact that I know that in your heart, because we've spoken, in your heart, this podcast is about you sharing, the wonderful things that you have learned about self growth and self awareness, and 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 I just cannot tell you enough how proud I am to know you, because there's just so many people on this planet that it's just really all about them, or all about their families, or but it's all about their circle.
Hmm.
What you're doing here is it's not about any self pleasure. It's about sharing with other people in hopes that they get um the energy to promote their own self growth
Mm.
like you have,
Yeah.
and that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So that's why I keep saying it's an honor for me to be on your platform.
Well, I appreciate it from day one. I tell you, I announced this on Facebook
Mhm.
one day. I never thought that I would get that many people behind me. I really didn't believe it. You have been one of my biggest supporters, like just sharing stuff. I was, showing my sister. She
Mhm.
wants to be called. I know she's the one that's running the show, and
Right.
she tells me not to touch the mic. That's why I'm like, I mean, she's like, "Don't worry, it
Better
has a
listen to
stand."
your sister.
Yeah. So, she actually, she pretty much runs everything. I'm just
Mhm.
here running my mouth.
Yeah.
So it's just good. But it's kind of we really were going through why we do this,
Right.
and once I put that out, and I go, wow, like I put it out, and I wake up in the morning, and like I have all these positive things coming.
Right.
I'm like, really? Because I wasn't expecting that. And to be honest, I didn't grow up people patting me on the back like, "Go get it, boy." You know, what I mean, it's
Mhm.
just this is what you're supposed to do. This, you're not supposed to
Yeah,
do.
not from our neighborhood.
Yeah. So exactly. That's exactly.
Not from where we come from,
So
no.
so I was
Yeah.
very shocked.
Mhm.
I was, happily,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, and I showed her. I'm like, look what Kerry's doing. She's like,
Mhm.
who's Kerry? Oh, the guy I went to high school with.
Mhm.
He's put it on his thing. I mean, he's actually vouching for me,
Yeah.
and he's had a radio show on for like 10 years.
Mhm.
So thank you very much for that. That
Yeah.
actually it helps a lot.
Well, I should be thanking you because, again, you're, like I said, without being redundant, you're giving people, not just your guests, right?
Mhm.
Because that's a whole nother piece.
Mhm.
You're giving your
Yeah.
guests an opportunity to share.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, I'm in media, so I
Yeah.
do interviews and stuff
Yeah.
like that, right? But you have a plethora of guests that are coming
Yeah.
on your show
Yeah.
who may not feel like they have a story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this gives them an opportunity to share whatever their story is, whatever their journey is, whatever their growth experiences are, right? You're giving them a platform, but then you're also giving your viewers an opportunity to tune in to listen to people's stories who might um, give them a sense of, you know what, maybe I should do this or maybe I should do that. Because not everybody's going to go to a self help program or
Mhm.
a self growth seminar.
Mhm.
A lot of people are not going to do that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people may be inclined to watch this show and not even know what they're watching,
Yeah.
but then get so much out of it. And then you might have people that watch the exact same episode and get a trillion different tidbits out of it. So
Yeah.
I have to thank you for having the foresight to want to put out to establish a platform that helps so many people. You should be clapping for yourself because
Thank you. Thank you.
it's not the norm.
Yeah, yeah. I see that, and by you coming on the show and actually throwing more knowledge on this and understanding what I'm trying to do here, what we're trying to do, it's a community. That's why I always
Yes.
say, come grow with us,
Right.
because what it reminds me, you're not done growing.
Right.
So, and you're responsible now to keep growing because
Mhm.
you announced to everybody you're growing.
Growing. Yeah.
So there's things that I do. My morning routines, a lot of times, I tell you that cold shower this morning, I was like, oh my God, I hate myself. Why did I
I
do
can't
it?
believe you do that.
But I
Yeah.
do it every morning.
Wow.
3 minutes, go shower. That's part of the routine. I do that.
Salute, because I
Yeah,
could never. I as much.
believe me, you can. It's
Yeah,
just,
you're right. I can't.
yeah.
Will I? That's a different story.
Thank you for tuning in to the Coach Cardoso Show, Part 1 interview with Keri D. Singleton. Join us next time on Part 2 of the interview with Keri D. Singleton, here on the Coach Cardoso Show, where we grow as a community. Come grow with us.